Welcome to For Good Measure, an interview series celebrating diverse composers and other creative artists, sponsored by a grant from the California Arts Council. I'm Nanette McGuinness, Artistic Executive Director of Ensemble for these times. In this week's episode, we continue our conversation with Hitomi Oba, who we spoke to in December 2023. Would you say that your identity and background played a role in your musical career, or more in terms of your background or in your style?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's inevitable, right? It's inevitable that our, backgrounds as people influence our music, and I think it's just a matter of whether we're kind of like putting up barriers to inhibit that or not. So again, being aware of when I am putting up maybe potential barriers and letting them down, because if I let them down, then I think inevitably it'll influence these things. So yeah, I'm realizing as I get older, I've become more self-aware of these things, and unpacking all various things. I'm realizing more and more how it does influence my career, right? So if we're just talking about the career portion, not even the musical part,
Mm-hmm.
my trajectory to becoming a professional musician, the childhood influences, the support I got, being in an environment where, yes, arts were valued, for instance, and people were supportive and encouraging, and obviously there were also being I'm realizing again more that I was also subject to negative biases and messaging as a
Mm-hmm.
child and as a young person and as an adult, that have to do with expectations of what one can or not do.
Right, right.
It's and the intersection of these various biases. I'm like a small Asian woman. I used to be a young small Asian woman, which is like very subject to a lot of like different kinds of racial and also gender based things being here. So then how that translated to how I kind of not consciously, but learn to behave to survive in these fields, where I was often the minority, So I'm realizing now that a lot of the demeanors I take in professional situations were ways of acting to kind of survive those situations, oh, I'm not a threat,
Right.
please, I'm not a threat. I'm also not a sexual interest or romantic interest. I would like to be, regarded with respect, and I kind of used to, in order to do those, kind of send this message, I might like prop others up more than necessary,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of like create this, hierarchy on my own, not on my own, it was existent, but me kind of like enforcing a lot of
Right.
these social
Reinforcing.
hierarchies, reinforcing them to kind of, yeah, is to try to survive and, protect myself.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm kind of been realizing, even just like this past week, I've been like unpacking a lot of these things. I'm almost 40, and like it's taking a long time for me to realize these things. But I think also actually, yeah, going back to the being a parent thing, I'm realizing a lot of these things now as I'm parenting
Right.
two girls. Yeah.
Sure.
Like this is another parent tangent. But and they're obvious, it's not having to do with music profession, but for instance, my older daughter had an experience recently where she kind of like was uh, stood up in a situation where someone was doing something that she didn't appreciate. It wasn't like super serious or anything, but I think like her teachers described it as like she first like used her body language to show them she didn't like it, and then when they didn't stop, she like said something verbally like, I don't like that, can you stop?
Good.
And you're right. But I realized the big realization here was that my immediate reaction in that situation would have been to tell her like, oh, can you say the same message, but in a way that's nicer, that doesn't hurt the other person's feelings. But when I brought this about, the teachers were like, no, we're proud of her. She like, this is important for her to be able to state this in the way she did, exactly like she did, especially as a girl in the
Right.
society. And
To
I
own her
just
power.
felt
Yeah.
to own her value. And it was this huge realization for me. And that it was like a shattering realization for me that I was passing on my conditioning to her. My inclination was to pass
Mm-hmm.
on this conditioning to her, and it was shattering to me. And I've been like conscious of it since, I mean, obviously be kind is a message I want to pass on,
Right.
but my inclination was her to kind of consider the other person's feelings more than even her own, and to say like, we don't
Yeah.
want the other person to be offended. So I've been kind of carrying that over into my professional situations as well. And I applied that to a realization on a recent gig where I was like, oh, I'm doing it again.
Yes.
I'm doing it in this situation because I was playing with people I didn't really know. And,
Mm-hmm.
it was in a kind of situation with maybe like older people, who were not on the same kind of,
Wavelength.
we were that place that we were talking about earlier. And so I think I was being extra cautious and I was
Mm-hmm.
being extra, propping them up more, and it kind of like, I was like, oh, I'm reverting back to this thing, even though I had this realization. And it's very deep conditioning, especially being a minority in these kind of, especially in the jazz field. It was like predominantly male dominated. Sometimes I was the only woman, it's often like, okay, most of the time I'm the only Asian American woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I can only count several instances without my sister where I was not the only Asian American woman,
Mm.
often younger than everybody else too. So, yeah, it's it's been an
Struggle.
ongoing struggle, and realizing these things. And then I think I'm glad I'm able to realize these things now so that I can hopefully try to address them more as I parent and also as I continue, working in these environments. Um, yeah. But yeah, musically too. That was mostly about even just like being a professional in the field, but musically, especially, this again goes to the jazz world a little bit more just because it's more male dominated, and Asian Americans are less represented there.
Right.
But there's, a lot of times there's been a need to like defy expectations, especially
Yes.
coming from a place like Berkeley where everyone's like, yes, you're a woman, like there's a lot of hope hung up on you. Like, you're a girl, you can, yeah, you go get him. And it's like, okay, I'm going to go get him, like, I can play like the guys is basically
Right.
the messaging I was getting as I was growing up. And so that translates to certain kinds of playing
Mm-hmm.
and also behavior on the bandstand, and demeanor too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of reflecting back on that now as I get older, and again trying to be like, well, what is my voice? And
Right.
that isn't have to do just with expectations, whether they're positive expectations or negative expectations. The matter of like proving yourself or kind of trying to, or, I don't know, respond to people's hopes. I don't know. So musically, that's been, again, a lot of unpacking and trying to figure out what that means.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I'm grateful because I've been enriched by so many diverse perspectives and inputs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so kind of trying to embrace these various traits, that might seem less competitive, and recognizing my reasons for making certain decisions has been, an ongoing kind of somewhat more recent priority.
Maybe related to having kids, that
Absolutely.
yeah, that the model that you're providing and the mirroring that you might be seeing, because I think it's so hard in our society. It isn't just the conditioning. There's the
Mm,
conditioning that you were talking about and the impulses that we're trained out of,
right.
right? Because they're not nice necessarily, in quotes, not nice necessarily. But there's this really tricky balance that a woman has to walk between knowing what's right, speaking her mind, and being put down for that,
Right.
or being afraid of being put down for that. It's just a really thin line.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a woman, and I'm realizing now, yeah, in this new role as a mother, especially too, right? So it's
Right.
like, how vocal should I be about being a mother? In some cases, it's so important, right? To say, like, yes, representation, like, I'm more a representation, right? So for other people to see and to kind of like, maybe change people's minds about these perceptions. But at the same time, you're right. Then you're making yourself, or I'm making myself more vulnerable to potential, professional backlash,
Sure.
and stigma. So yeah, it's a fine line, like you say. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that line moves around. It's not like,
moves around.
it moves around time wise and location wise. And so,
Right.
you don't
The
always know where
company.
you are. Did you find that in terms of the trajectory, that either being a woman or a Japanese American, an Asian performer, musician, composer, did it affect the trajectory of your career?
That's hard to say. I think in a lot of ways, I received a lot of encouragement,
Sounds like it, yeah.
maybe because of that.
Hmm.
But maybe I would also say I received a lot of encouragement and support in despite of that as well, right? So so yeah, I'm not sure. I think I'll be having to discover that more, like how my path could have been influenced, that like in terms of the actual actually following this path forward.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, if it's the in despite of that, or also, but because of that, I attributed a lot of it to my parents,
Yeah,
of being able to follow through with this, and kind of like reminding me over and over, like, yes, arts are important to humanity, and
yeah.
just being encouraging of that, and reminding me of the values of what are important. Um, Yeah, so I think in some ways it's helped, and in a lot of ways I feel like I did it despite the difficulties of, having those identities. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a perfectly legitimate answer to say, no, didn't affect it at all. But it sounds like for you, it was good.
Yeah. Yeah, there were challenges because of that, I'm certain. Absolutely. But I think in some ways it did have, it did help in a lot of ways too.
Thank you for listening to For Good Measure, and a special thank you to our guest, Hitomi Oba, for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button, and support us by sharing it with your friends, posting about it on social media, and leaving us a rating and a review. To learn more about E4TT, our concert season online and in the Bay Area, or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit us at e4tt.org. This podcast is made possible in part by a grant from the California Arts Council and generous donors like you. For Good Measure is produced by Nanette McGuinness and Ensemble for These Times, and designed by Brennan Stokes, with special thanks to co-producer and audio engineer Stephanie M. Neumann. Remember to keep supporting equity in the arts, and tune in next week for Good Measure.